Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons and love are told. If you love stories that keep you hooked with drama, twists and heartfelt lessons, then stay with me until the end. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. I grew up in a house where appearances mattered more than love. My parents were wealthy, respected in the city, and known for throwing extravagant parties that made the social pages. They valued status, polished smiles, and perfect reputations. But inside that shining world, I was the forgotten daughter. My sister Marissa was their treasure. She was the beauty queen, the social butterfly, the one they groomed for perfection. She was pampered with piano lessons, private tutors, and wardrobes filled with clothes from the most expensive boutiques. Every birthday of hers was like a royal coronation, complete with imported cakes and hired photographers. Meanwhile, Lydia was the quiet shadow in the background. I was smart, hardworking, and determined, but nothing I did was ever enough. I had to fight for scholarships just to keep up with my education. I worked part-time jobs during summers, sometimes balancing 3 shifts just to cover what my parents refused to do. When I came home with perfect report cards, they would barely glance at them before turning their attention back to Marissa's latest shopping trip or her new boyfriend. My victories were silent celebrations, whispered only to myself. The clearest moment of their disregard was during my college graduation. I had pushed myself to the very edge, studying until dawn, writing endless papers, and sacrificing everything to prove my worth. When I heard my name announced with the words summa cum laude, my chest swelled with pride. I walked across that stage, the applause echoing in my ears, only to look out into the audience and see their seats empty. Later I learned they had flown to Paris with Marissa to celebrate her engagement to Bradley, a wealthy businessman's son. The shame burned inside me so deeply that even the honor of the degree felt hollow. Years passed and I tried to convince myself that I didn't need their approval. I built my own path even if it was lonely. And then when I least expected it, I met Daniel. He came into my life in the most ordinary way through his work as a plumber. The sink in my apartment had burst, and he arrived to fix it. I still remember the way he smiled at me, not the kind of smile people give out of politeness but one that made me feel seen. We started talking and soon we couldn't stop. Daniel was unlike anyone I had ever known. He was grounded, kind, and real in ways that made me feel safe. While my parents valued wealth and titles, Daniel valued honesty and effort. He worked hard every single day, sometimes covered in grease or mud, but he carried himself with pride. He never apologized for what he did, never pretended to be something else. And in that authenticity, I found freedom. With him, I could finally breathe without feeling like I had to compete. When Daniel asked me to marry him, it wasn't in some glittering ballroom with violins playing in the background. It was in our tiny living room, after we had cooked dinner together, laughing over spilled flour. He knelt down with a simple ring, his hands trembling, and asked me to be his forever. I said yes without a second thought. That moment was perfect because it was real, because it was ours. But when I shared the news with my parents, the response was crushing. My mother's lips tightened in disapproval, and my father shook his head. They didn't even try to hide their disdain. A plumber? My father scoffed. Lydia, do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Do you realize what people will say? My mother added, you're throwing away your life on someone beneath you. I wanted to scream that love wasn't about bank accounts or designer suits, but no matter what I said, they wouldn't listen. From that day, things grew worse. My parents didn't celebrate my engagement. They didn't ask about wedding plans. Instead, they turned their energy toward Marissa's life. They threw her an extravagant engagement party with chandeliers, ice sculptures, and champagne fountains, as though to prove to the world what a real celebration looked like. They invited hundreds of guests, splurged on every detail, and not once mentioned that I was also engaged. I stood at that party, watching people toast to Marissa and Bradley, knowing full well that my own love story was invisible to them. Still, I moved forward. Daniel and I planned a simple but beautiful wedding. We couldn't afford luxury, but we had joy. We booked a small church, gathered friends who genuinely loved us, and worked on every detail ourselves. My dress wasn't designer, but it was perfect for me. My bouquet wasn't imported, but Daniel helped pick the flowers, and that made it priceless. Every step of the process was filled with love, and that was enough for me until the week of the wedding. That was when my parents announced that they wouldn't be attending. Their excuse? A charity gala that happened to fall on the same day. My heart broke when they told me over the phone. Their voices cold and unapologetic. "We can't embarrass ourselves in front of our colleagues, Lydia," my mother said bluntly. "Do you expect us to explain why our daughter is marrying a plumber? People talk." My father added, "We'll send a gift. That should be enough." I felt like the ground had vanished beneath my feet. All my life, I had fought for their love, craved their approval, and in the moment when I needed them most, they abandoned me completely. I hung up the phone, tears streaming down my face, and Daniel held me as I broke down. He whispered, "We don't need them, Lydia. We have us. That's all that matters." On the morning of my wedding, I walked down the aisle with a mixture of sorrow and joy. The sorrow came from the empty seats where my parents should have been. The joy came from Daniel waiting for me at the altar, his eyes filled with love so strong it erased every doubt. The church was decorated with flowers that friends had helped arrange. The music played softly, and when I reached him, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. As we exchanged vows, I let go of the weight of years of neglect. In that moment, I wasn't the overlooked daughter, the second choice, or the embarrassment. I was a bride marrying the man who saw me, loved me, and cherished me beyond measure. When the officiant declared us husband and wife, the applause from our guests was warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the cold silence of my parents' absence. That night, as we celebrated with laughter, music, and dancing, I felt a mix of emotions. There was a sting in knowing my parents had chosen appearances over me, but there was also relief in realizing that I didn't need their validation anymore. I had Daniel. I had love. And though they didn't know it yet, life was about to deliver a twist that would shatter their arrogance and change everything forever. The morning after my wedding, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains of the small and Daniel, and I had chosen for our first night as husband and wife. My heart was still heavy with the absence of my parents, but the way Daniel pulled me close, kissed my forehead and whispered, "We did it," reminded me that love mattered more than empty seats. Still, somewhere deep inside, a quiet ache lingered, a question I couldn't silence. Why wasn't I ever enough for them? We had planned a modest honeymoon on a quiet island, far from the buzzing city lights my parents worshipped. For once, I didn't want to see glittering skyscrapers or manicured parties. I wanted sunsets, ocean breezes, and peace. Daniel was unusually quiet the first couple of days. At first, I thought he was simply tired. But then, on the third night, as we sat on the beach, our feet buried in the cool sand, he reached for my hand with a seriousness that made my heart pound. "Lydia," he began, his voice low but steady, "there's something I've been keeping from you. Not because I don't trust you, but because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have." My stomach tightened. The words felt heavy, as if they were about to shatter the very foundation of my world. I stared at him, the crashing waves filling the silence, and whispered, "What is it?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I'm not just a plumber." He paused, searching my eyes. "I graduated from MIT as an electrical engineer. I worked for one of the top firms in the country designing systems that you probably read about in the news. But after my father passed away, I took over the plumbing business because it was his legacy, and because I was building something of my own." I blinked at him, unsure if I had heard correctly. "Wait. Mit." He nodded slowly. "Yes. And for the last 3 years I've been developing something called Aqualogic, a water conservation system that reduces waste and recycles efficiently. It's already being tested in several cities. Lydia, I'm the CEO of Aqualogic Systems." My breath caught. My hands trembled as I tried to absorb the truth. All this time I thought I had married a simple plumber, someone my parents had deemed unworthy, someone they mocked and dismissed. But in reality, I had married a visionary, a man far beyond what their shallow eyes could ever see. My heart swelled with pride but also with pain, because I knew how different everything would have been if my parents had known the truth. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Because I needed to know you loved me, Lydia. Not the degree, not the title, not the company. Just me. His eyes glistened in the moonlight, vulnerable and raw. And you did. You loved me without all of this. That's the kind of love I want for the rest of my life. Tears spilled down my cheeks, but they weren't hurt. They were from the overwhelming realization that I had found something rare and unshakable. I threw my arms around him, clinging to the man who had given me more than I had ever dreamed of, not wealth but truth. The rest of our honeymoon passed like a dream. Daniel took phone calls from investors while we sipped drinks by the water. I watched him sketch ideas in his notebook late at night, his mind always racing with possibilities. On the final day, he received an email that changed everything. A group of venture capitalists had agreed to invest $5 million into Aqualogic. He looked at me with excitement, his hands shaking, and said, "Lydia, this is it. This is the beginning." When we returned home, reality hit with full force. My parents had ignored our wedding entirely, but they could not ignore the headlines that soon followed. News outlets began writing about Aqualogic and the young CEO behind it. Articles praised Daniel as a visionary, a man who could revolutionize water systems and change the future of sustainability. His photo appeared in magazines, his name trended online, and suddenly, the man my parents dismissed as just a plumber had become a figure of influence. I sent my parents a wedding photo one evening, Daniel in his suit, me in my gown, our smiles radiant with joy. In the caption I wrote simply, "Mr. and Mrs. Lydia and Daniel Carter, married the day you chose a gala instead of us." Attached to the same message was a clipping of the article announcing the $5 million investment into Aqualogic systems. It didn't take long for my phone to ring. My mother's voice quivered on the other end. "Lydia, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say he was accomplished?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. Would it have mattered? You never cared about who he was, only what he did for a living. You couldn't see beyond the uniform. My father tried to interject, his voice booming like it always did when he wanted control. "Lydia, you've embarrassed us by keeping this from us. We could have." I cut him off. "No. You embarrassed yourselves by valuing appearances over love. You chose a gala over your own daughter's wedding. Don't twist this into something it isn't." The line went silent. For the first time in years, I had spoken without fear, without the desperate need for their approval. I felt a strange sense of liberation, as if the chains I had worn since childhood had finally broken. But fate wasn't finished weaving its tangled web. A few weeks later, news broke that Marissa's perfect husband, Bradley, wasn't the success story everyone believed him to be. Whispers of fraud began circulating, and soon they turned into front-page scandals. He had been inflating his company's numbers, lying to investors, and covering it up with Marissa's charm and their lavish lifestyle. The empire they had flaunted crumbled almost overnight. While Daniel's company was rising, attracting contracts and government interest, Marissa's world was collapsing. And with her downfall came cracks in my parents' carefully polished image. Their ties to Bradley cost them deals, clients, and eventually, the wealth they had built their pride on. And just like that, the balance shifted. The daughter they had once called an embarrassment was thriving. The daughter they had overlooked was married to a man making history. And the golden child they had worshipped was drowning in disgrace. Still, even as I watched it all unfold, I couldn't help but wonder, was this justice? Or was it the start of something more complicated? Because beneath my satisfaction, I could feel it. The reckoning had only just begun. The first time I saw my parents after the wedding was almost surreal. They showed up unannounced at our new home. The same parents who had once refused to stand by me, now standing nervously on my doorstep. My mother's carefully sculpted appearance had cracks, no more sparkling jewelry, no chauffeur-driven car idling outside. My father, once towering in his suits and booming with authority, looked smaller, hunched in a way I had never seen before. They were not there to boast. They were there because they had no other place to turn. Daniel greeted them politely, though I could see the flicker of pain in his eyes. He had never forgotten the insults they threw at him, the way they had called him beneath us. But being the man he was, he stepped aside and let them in. My mother's eyes darted around our living room, filled not with luxury but with warmth, photos of us on the walls, books stacked on the shelves, the smell of dinner still lingering. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if unsure of how to begin. Finally, my father spoke, his voice strained. Lydia, we made mistakes. Many mistakes. We thought we were protecting you. But we see now that we were wrong. I sat across from them, my hands clasped together, my heart pounding. Protecting me? You abandoned me. You left me to walk down the aisle without you because you were ashamed of who I chose to love. My mother's eyes welled up with tears. We were blind. We thought status mattered more than character. But when Bradley's lies came to light, when Marissa's world fell apart, we realized everything we valued was shallow. Her voice cracked. We lost everything, Lydia. We've lost our wealth, our friends, even our company. And Marissa. Her words trailed off, but I already knew. Marissa had called me days earlier, her voice thick with despair. She admitted that Bradley had been controlling, manipulative, and that she had ignored the signs because she wanted to keep living the perfect life. Now she was drowning in debts, her reputation shattered. She asked if she could stay with Daniel and me for a while, and though I hadn't answered then, I knew it was only a matter of time. When Marissa finally arrived, she was not the sister I remembered. Gone were the designer dresses and the smug smile. She looked fragile, her eyes ringed with exhaustion, her once glossy hair tied back in a messy bun. She clung to me in a way she never had before, sobbing into my shoulder. I thought I had everything, Lydia. I thought I was better than you. But I had nothing. Her words pierced me. For years she had been the shining star while I was the forgotten one, and yet here she was, seeking refuge in the very home she once mocked. I held her, torn between resentment and compassion. Daniel squeezed my hand gently, reminding me silently that sometimes strength meant forgiving even when the wounds were fresh. Life changed quickly after that. While my parents scrambled to salvage their broken image, Daniel's company soared. Aqualogic won contracts to supply major cities, and governments praised the system for its innovation. Investors lined up, and soon, Daniel was not just a CEO but a symbol of change. I watched him with pride, knowing that he was everything my parents had claimed to want for me, though they had been too blind to see it before. And yet, when my father came to me one night, asking if Daniel's company could collaborate with what little remained of his own, I drew a firm line. No, I told him. This isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries. You can't suddenly claim interest in my life because of what Daniel has achieved. If you want to be part of my world, it has to be for me, not for what I married into. The silence that followed was heavy. My father's eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Humility. He nodded slowly, almost as though he finally understood. Months passed and slowly, the distance between us began to shrink. My parents were stripped of the wealth they had clung to, and in losing it, they found something they had long forgotten: humanity. They sold what was left of their company and began working with organizations focused on affordable housing, shifting their influence from luxury to necessity. For the first time, they seemed to value people for who they were, not for what they owned. Marissa stayed with us for nearly a year. It wasn't easy. Old tensions resurfaced, arguments flared, and sometimes I wanted to slam the door on her and walk away. But with each passing day, she softened. She found work as a teacher's assistant, something far removed from the glamorous life she once flaunted, but she found joy in it. Watching her play with children, laughing in ways I had never seen before, I realized she was finally becoming her true self. As for me, I no longer sought my parents' approval. Their love, if it came, would be a gift, not a necessity. My worth was not defined by their recognition but by the life I had built with Daniel, and the life we continued to build together. When Daniel suggested we start a scholarship fund at MIT, I knew it was the perfect way to give back. We named it after his late father, a man who had taught him dignity in labor, a lesson the world desperately needed to remember. The day we announced the scholarship, my parents stood beside us. They weren't dressed in finery or commanding attention. They stood quietly, their heads bowed, their hands clasped, as if they too understood the deeper meaning of it all. For once, it wasn't about status. It was about creating a legacy of value. Standing there, I felt a sense of closure. The girl who had once begged for their approval no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had built her own worth, who had found love, and who had discovered that real power comes not from wealth or titles, but from authenticity. And as I looked around that room, filled with students who would one day change the world because of opportunities they were given, I realized something important. The story of my life wasn't about being was the proof that love, humility, and resilience can outshine even the brightest chandeliers of empty pride. Moral lesson. Life has a way of flipping the script. The people who dismiss you today may one day stand in awe of the person you become. My parents thought I was an embarrassment because they measured worth by wealth and appearances. But love proved them wrong, and truth revealed itself in time. My journey taught me that chasing validation from those who refuse to see your value is a losing game. Real worth isn't handed down from family or bought with status. It is built through integrity, resilience, and the quiet strength of knowing who you are. If you ever feel overlooked, remember this. You are not defined by the voices that belittle you. You are defined by the life you build, the kindness you show, and the courage you carry. Sometimes, revenge doesn't come through loud victories. It comes in living well, in standing tall when others expected you to fall, and in becoming the very proof that love and authenticity are stronger than pride. So if you are connected with my story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and comment below the biggest lesson you've learned today. Your voice matters here.